Hi, folks. We're Tassless today. Tassless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the globalists. When they were forcing globalization onto the rest of the world, they they ruthlessly used American commercial and economic power to force, not ask nicely, but to force globalization on the rest of the world, and to ensure that only those people that were in favor of globalization were appointed to key positions in government, public service, banking and finance, and so on. So America was very much under the control of the globalists, was very much the engine room of that. Now, for how long the globalists were in partial or absolute control of the United States, or at least parts of the international trading system, and using that international trading and commercial system to force globalization on the world. I would argue that even in the days of Ronald Reagan, it was taking shape. Certainly, Jimmy Carter and so on. Now, whether or not back then we could see the clear picture of what was going on, that's another matter. But now, as we look into the rearview mirror, we can see that these things were being put in place, piece by piece. And to make up what today, of course, we see quite clearly is the globalist, brutal, horrible, destructive juggernaut. So American power was centralist. It couldn't have been done without American power. There were just too many. They had to have a central point that they could use, the globalists. They could use to, threaten, intimidate, cajole other countries. Now, bear in mind that at the time globalization kicked off, America was 26% or something of the world economy, and the next biggest player, I think at the time anyway, was something like 5% of the world economy or 6%. So it gives you an idea of just how much relative clout America had. If you weren't playing ball with America, then you're in trouble. Now, they didn't use tariffs. Well, they did use tariffs, but not directly in the sense that say President.Trump talks about it. They would do things. The Americans would do things like say, we will grant favored nation trading status to certain countries. Now, that's code speak for, we won't put heavy tariffs on you, but we will on the others. Or we just won't let your products come into America, or we won't let you use the American banking system. And as the US dollar was effectively the international currency, if the Americans cut you out of the US dollar trading sort of system of access to US dollar, trades and payments and so on, then you were screwed. It was a tough gig. So through this, the Americans could coerce all sorts of countries to go along. Now, the first countries they coerced were the English-speaking ones, like Canada, Australia, Britain, and so on. Then it went to other countries, and so gradually they were able to really bring the whole world, or much of it anyway, into the globalization thing that we see today. The holdouts were the Islamic nations, which is why the US, the globalist controlled US was always obsessed with invading and, bombing and so on, the Islamic republic. So they gave up on trying to do regime change in those places, instead bring masses of Islamic people into the West. Gee, how's that worked out? So again, American power is used, and I've mentioned this many times before. But I was on a flight. I used to spend a lot of time in the US, and I was on a flight. I think it was from New York to I think it was either Florida or maybe DFW in Texas, something like that. And I was sitting next to a guy I got upgraded to first class, and I was sitting next to a guy who was part of the trading mission from one of the Caribbean islands. I can't remember which one. It wasn't a big island. And, he didn't know jack shit about trade, this guy. He was just the son of one of the goons that were running that Caribbean island. And so he was getting like a freebie trip to New York so he could go get drunk and chase chicks and stuff. But anyway, he was there, and I was sitting next to him, and he'd had to go back early, and he'd been detached from the rest of the group he was with. And he just mentioned, like, you get talking to people. And since I did so much flying, I got quite good at just impromptu, chatting to people. Hey, how you doing? I'm from Australia, and this sort of, that type of stuff. And you can normally always get people talking, especially if you say you're from Australia, because it's such a backwater so far away that they kind of don't care what they say. They talk about loose lip sync and shit. But anyway, this guy was saying that he was part of the trading mission, and he was bewildered. He said, "Look, the American trading team that came to talk to us, they didn't want to talk about trade at all. It didn't even get mentioned. All they did was make demands as to how we had to implement." This is him talking. How we had to implement social engineering things back in our island. That was all they wanted to talk about, and they were demanding that we have got to set up gay, lesbian counselling services. We have to set up a family court. We have to set up a child support agency. We have to, institute violence against women courts, and all that sort of stuff. And that was the requirement. That's all they wanted to talk about. And he was, we went to talk about trade, and they didn't mention trade once. It was all how you have to re-engineer your society. But these are the basic globalist thing, to create division along gender lines of sexuality and this sort of thing, to create as much social division as possible, claiming that, well, this is all to be inclusive and we're only trying to create a paradise. But this was it. Now, what intrigued him more than anything was not only were they demanding this, but it was being accompanied by the most dire commercial and financial threats. For example, every day they get a large cruise ship, or maybe more than one cruise ship, stops at their island on Caribbean cruises, and if these guys don't do what they're told, so the Americans threaten, no cruise ships will be stopping at your island. So again, you can do that? What? Are you serious? This is a bunch of goons and thugs making threats. This is not a trading agreement or anything like that. And then they went on that America buys, sugar or whatever it was from the island, but at inflated prices. Not only is America going to stop buying sugar, but or it'll be drastically reduced, but it won't be at inflated prices to help them out, and they won't be able to use the American banking system. So effectively, they were threatening utter devastation to this island economy, Caribbean island economy, unless they went along with it. You got to have LGBTQ offices in downtown. These were the sorts of things, and he was bewildered by this. I don't think he gave a shit one way or another, really, because he comes from a wealthy sort of family at the apex of the society. So, is it personally going to affect him if there's an LGBTQ thing in the downtown? Probably not. But again, his amazement and bewilderment was why they didn't talk trade. Instead, they just made high-handed threats and demanded social engineering. Now, that's obviously a microcosm. It's just a Caribbean island. But those conversations at various levels with different type threats and so on were going on all across the Western world at the time, or all across the world at the time. And that's how America was using its power to force globalization on the rest of the world. The rest of the world wasn't going along with it willingly, or didn't very little of it would have happened had the Americans not been pushing for it. So this engine room of globalization has been around for quite a while. Example, Ronald Reagan giving amnesty to all those millions of Mexicans and things like that. Those were the early steps in it. As much as Reagan was committed to stopping, or I think he's a bit of a pawn, really. I'm not sure the decisions were ever his, but stopping, say, Soviet Union communist expansionism around the world, much as he was a player in that game, that was only to open up that part of the world to the globalist reach. It wasn't to stop communism per se. And we can look at it now, and when you see how many policies of the globalists smack heavily of Marxist tyrannical control, then we can see that it's one form of tyranny has just been replaced by another. Now, coming to what President Trump can do. This is the first time the West has been in a position where it can actually fight back against globalization. and the globalist policies, the destructive policies of globalization, such as mass migration and so on, such as people not being able to afford to buy a house, and even a modest one. Even just a garage in Sydney, Australia, can run into the hundreds of thousands. That's how insane things are here. But what can President Trump do? Well, President Trump can do the exact same things that the globalists were doing and using American power to achieve. President Trump can do exactly that. So I would hopefully that President Trump will use the power of the United States and in the office of the president to do things like that. In fact, again, do the same thing as the globalists were doing. Use American power in the same way. Now, whether heavy tariffs are favoured nation trading status, or however you want to term it, or dress it up, or whatever, but to say the same thing. All right, Australia, look, if you continue to bring in hundreds of thousands of third world peasant migrants each year, driving up the cost of real estate, replacing white people in all jobs, and if you continue to do that, you will have a 500% tariff. For example, I'm not saying 500, and you will suffer horribly if you continue with these globalist policies. Your economy will be torn to pieces. There'll be nothing left of it. So you must do these things. Not debating, not discussing, not negotiating. You must do these things. Mass migration stops right now. Right now, it stops. And we will allow you up to 50,000 people a year as migrants or into Australia. That's it. That's your limit. Anything above that, and the sanctions and the tariffs will begin. Similarly, you will have to deport now more than 2 million people back to their third world shithole countries. Now lots of Indians will be screaming, they must be, I am entitled to come to a first world country. No. Go back and make India a great place. Look, I wish India every success. I hope everything works out in India, but you're going back there. That's it. And so on. And bring Australia back, and the whole, whether it be Canada or Australia or Britain, to use the power of the American economy and the office of the presidency to stop the globalist policies, to stop the globalist practices, stacking the courts with activists, preventing free speech. Mass migration can come in, but if you dare criticize it, we'll throw you in prison. No, serious tariffs are going to happen from that. In the same way that the American powers used, you have to have LGBTQ rights legislation in your government right now. You have to do it, otherwise we'll crush you economically. It's the same thing. It's the same. It's just the other way around. Now the globalists won't like it. They'll scream about it, but it needs to be pointed out that this is how American powers used to force globalization on the rest of the world. Now we're going to unforce it, and I would hope that the president uses. There's not a whole lot of time to do it. I don't think uses the power of the U.S. economy and so on to do this, because as America has pretty much stopped its mass migration and illegal migration, the globalists are just ginning it up even more from the rest of the world. So Australia's almost doubled its intake of mass migrants, as indeed has Britain and Canada and so on. So the globalists have just moved their activism to other countries to compensate for the power they no longer have in the United States. And I would argue that President Trump can save the world from globalization, but he must be prepared to act. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.